So we began studying last week the laws of kashrus, and specifically what's called separating between meat and milk. And we did the Gemara in Chulin, and we came up with a whole bunch of different customs as to how long you have to wait after you ate meat before you can eat milk. So what I want to do now is finish up some of the material on that, and then we'll do a summary of what we learned both today and last week, and then we move on to the opposite situation where he wants to eat meat after milk. So first we're going to start with the tour, which you'll see here in the pages that David was kind enough to spread around, and it's page number 120 in Tzurba MiRabanan Yoredei Chelik Aleph. And on the top right, which is numbered as 28, because we got up to here last week, we see the tour in Yoredei Peites. And the tour, I think, even though it's short and sweet, but it's very, very fundamental in terms of eating milk after meat, because basically the tour presents two different approaches, and we'll see how we paskin, as to why we have to wait in order to eat milk after meat. One approach is called basar bein hashinayim, and that's the particles of meat that get stuck in your mouth, between your teeth. And the other reason for this is because basar, once you eat basar and it goes down to your stomach, then it's motzi shuman, and there's a certain taste of meat in your mouth for a period of time. Now, what we're trying to do is we're trying to guarantee that none of these reasons will apply, because we'll soon see in the Pri Megadim that the Pri Megadim wants to assume, and the Pri Megadim is one of the pillars of Ashkenazic Psak 150, 200 years ago, that we should worry about both possibilities. So we're going to talk about situations where he chews the meat but doesn't swallow it. That's called le'isa. And we're going to talk about a case where he, let's say, eats a tavshil of basar, and he's got shuman that comes up from the bottom. So he says the following: Ubetoch hazman, within that period of time, let's assume, as we mentioned last week, there are many shitot, many opinions and minhagim as to how long you have to wait. You know, you have 6 hours, you have the Ramah who has 0 hours, and then you have 1 hour and you have 3 hours. But let's assume, for argument's sake, that, as we saw last week, the poskim will advocate that we wait 6 hours. Now, after we wait 6 hours, then basar bein hashinayim is no longer asur. What that means is that any particles of teeth that you have, particles of meat that you have between your teeth, are considered null and void with the passage of time. It's as if they disintegrated. But you have another problem of basar motzi shuman. Now, how long does the taste of the basar remain in your system, and it sort of like comes up on you? That's also only 6 hours. So once you wait the 6 hours, then you've covered yourself for both reasons for having to separate milk from meat. You've covered the basar bein hashinayim, because presumably it's no longer basar, and you've covered the motzi shuman, basar motzi shuman, because that only lasts for 6 hours. Now the Torah calculates scenarios that might depend on these two reasons. He says the following: Laso letinok, if he chews for a tinok, that means he doesn't swallow the meat, he only chews it and then feeds the child that which he chews. He says, in such a case, the basar is not motzi shuman. And therefore, if your reasoning for requiring a 6-hour waiting period is because of the shuman, well, you didn't swallow it. It's not in the stomach, and therefore it's not motzi shuman. However, the Rambam is the one who's bothered by the basar bein hashinayim. So therefore, even in a case where he doesn't swallow the meat, he only chews the meat, and therefore there's no shuman, nevertheless, you have a problem once he chews the meat of basar bein hashinayim. However, after 6 hours, as we said before, even the Rambam, who's worried about basar bein hashinayim, is no longer concerned with basar bein hashinayim. So that according to the Rambam, when you chew the meat, you have to wait 6 hours, even if you don't swallow the meat, because the Rambam is dealing with basar bein hashinayim. After the 6 hours, you're okay, because the basar bein hashinayim is not a problem after 6 hours, nor is the shuman. So that even though laso latinok, he does not have a problem of shuman, of being motzi shuman, because he didn't swallow the meat, but nevertheless, he has a problem of basar bein hashinayim, and that problem, like the problem of shuman, is resolved after 6 hours. So, which of these two reasons do we accept la halacha? The Pri Megadim writes that we should accept both reasons l'chumra, and therefore, in the case of lois, where he chews it and then he spits it out, then he still has to wait 6 hours because of the Rambam's position on basar bein hashinayim. But now we have another issue. What about a tavshil sheyesh bo shuman? In other words, you have, let's say, a cooked food that has some rotev, some, let's say, gravy, meat gravy in it, and it doesn't get stuck between your teeth. Everything here is just liquid. But the problem is that you have shuman. And now when you swallow this soup, let's call it, which has some sort of meaty fats in it, it has, let's say a gravy of meat, for example, there won't be a problem of the Rambam of basar bein hashinayim. The Rambam would be okay with this. You can eat milk immediately afterwards because there's no basar bein hashinayim. You just rinse your mouth out and you're okay. But on the other hand, you have the reasoning of the other Rishonim who argue that the separation between milk and meat, milk following meat, is because the meat is still motzi shuman. And since you're eating the tavshil, then you're going to have shuman that goes into your body, that goes down to your stomach. We'll call it the gravy, the meat gravy. It's not caught in between your teeth, but it is down in your stomach and it's being motzi shuman. So in the following two cases, we would have an afkamina between the two svaras as to why we wait 6 hours. Case number one is lois latino without belia. He chews the meat. The meat is stuck between his teeth, but he doesn't swallow it, so there's no shuman. And then we have the case of a tavshil shel shuman, where there's no particles between his teeth, but then there's motzi shuman. And the Pri Megadim says we have to be machmir for both shitos. So the only case where we could possibly be matir would be, listen carefully, if you ate a tavshil that has shuman in it, shuman shel basar, but you didn't swallow it, you spit it out. Now you covered mimanavshach, as we say, no matter how you slice the cake. Even though you had fleishiks in your mouth, but you didn't swallow it, so there's no shuman coming up from your stomach. And even though you had fleishiks in your mouth, but you didn't chew anything solid that would have created basar bein hashinayim. So at this point, we would say that mimanavshach, no matter how you slice the cake, as we say, or how you slice the meat in this case, you would be allowed to eat milk immediately afterwards. You don't have basar bein hashinayim, and you don't have shuman being motzi because you didn't swallow the tavshil. Again, it's hard to imagine. Maybe you could help me out with this. I was trying to sort of rack my brains and come up with a scenario where you have a fleishig tavshil, but you chewed it without swallowing it. I guess it still has, let's say, pieces of pasta in it, let's say. So you made a fleishig pasta for the child, and you chew it up and spit it out. But maybe you can come up with a better case. Comes along the Pri Megadim, and this you'll see quoted by the Pischei Tshuva, he was Hungarian, in number 29, and he says, Im loes latino tavshil shiespo shuan. He's chewing a tavshil that's fleishiks. But the meat element in the tavshil is only a liquid. And then he spits it out in order to feed the tino. L'chora, says the Pischei Tshuva, l'cha pirushim ein tzarich lahamtin. He can eat milchiks immediately in that case. Why? The moshech leka, there's no problem with the shuman being pulled up from the bottom of his stomach because lo achal, he spit it out and he didn't swallow it. Ben eshinayim leka, because there's only liquid elements of meat. There are no solid particles of, a piece of steak that are getting caught between his teeth. But the Pri Megadim says, Yesh lahachmir lahamtin sheishos mishum lo plug. Now, honestly, I never knew that the Pri Megadim was like a low plug type of guy, if you know what I mean. Once you apply low plug, then you're really stuck. You're always going to be machmir in a low plug situation. And I'm troubled by this low plug. I mean, the whole business of waiting after meat for milchiks is all d'Rabbanan. You're not cooking meat and milk together, so there's no bas b'chov d'oraisa. The whole thing is harchaka. And now you're telling me, well, once we institute this harchaka and you have to wait 6 hours, then we're going to make it a across the board prohibition requiring 6 hours. You're not allowed to eat milk before 6 hours passed, even when there's absolutely no reason to wait 6 hours. You don't have the bas shinayim in this case. You don't have this motzi shuman in this case, but low plug. Low plug means, I see this as fleishiks because it does have fleishiks in it. I am chewing it up because I want to feed the tinok. Wait 6 hours. Because had there been particles of meat, you would have to wait 6 hours because of the Rambam. Had you swallowed it, you'd have to wait 6 hours because the shuman, even if there's no particles of meat. Omnam, he writes the following. Im tam basar beli lilososo polto ain't sarach hamtana. So what does it mean, tam basar beli lilososo? So we're talking about a case where not only is there no achila, he didn't swallow it, but he didn't even chew it. Tam basar. Again, I'm pressed for a scenario. Let's say a person puts a piece of meat in his mouth. He did not chew it, and he did not swallow it. Here, there's no low plug. What does that mean? There's no low plug. That's a double negative. Here, he doesn't have to wait. Because again, we have the miman of shach. There's no basa ben shinayim because he didn't chew it. There's no motzi shuman because he didn't swallow it. And what are you going to tell me? You're going to tell me that the Pri Megadim is going to apply low plug? No. The Pri Megadim applies low plug in the case where not ta'am basar, but he was loes. He chewed it. Again, what did he chew? Not a piece of meat. He chewed a tavshil shel basar. But at least he did a ma'isa le'isa, and therefore it's similar to the case of chewing a piece of meat. You're chewing something fleshik. No. You didn't chew the meat, but you chewed a tavshil that's fleshik. Low plug. But if you spit it out after you took meat into your mouth, rinse your mouth out and eat fleshiks. Now, I'm sorry, eat milk. Now, it occurs to my mind as we're speaking that this could be relevant to a chef. I mean, again, I didn't go to chef school. I did have one or two Talmidim who did go to chef school. I should call them up. It could be that a chef might actually want to taste the meat that he's cooking and not even chew it up, just taste it and spit it out. But it's interesting. There's a hechetimtza now that you can take meat into your mouth and not become fleishiks, meaning you can eat milchiks. And in number 30, he quotes this sefer called HaKashrus, Haloes Basar Upolto. He chews the meat and spits it out. He's feeding a child. Tzarech lahamtin sheishos, because we're worried about the Rambam and Basar Bein Hashinayim. Aval atoim upolto mibli lo aso. Here's the case. He tastes it, spits it out, and he didn't chew it. So he never swallowed fleishiks. There's no motzi shuvan. He never chewed it, so there's no basar bein hashinayim. Eino mechuyev b'amtana klal. Just simply rinse out your mouth. Make sure your hands are clean, either by washing them or looking at them very carefully, and you have no meat on your hands, and you're allowed to eat milchiks. So this, my friends, is the Gevaldige Kula of the day. You hear this? It paid to learn last week for an hour and today for another few minutes in order to come up with this Gevaldige Kula. That next time you take meat into your mouth and spit it out, just rinse your mouth out, make sure there's no meat on your hands, and eat milchiks. Gesundheit. Tremendous Kula. You have to write a letter to the editor. Dear editor, I'm so excited about this great Kula that I heard from Rabbi Burzon today. Okay. Now we get into the issue of Ketana. We know that a father is obligated in the chinuch of his child. And we know that amongst the various areas of chinuch, kashrus is a major, major area. I once mentioned to you, if you remember, maybe it was a couple of years ago, that Chassam Sofer had a tshuva about someone who had a child who had to be institutionalized. You know, he didn't have all the mental capacity for faculties, and the only institution that he could was serving treifa. And Chassam Sofer was dealing with this issue about feeding non-kosher food to a child. But there he came up with a kula, mostly based on the fact that there weren't too many options there, if you know what I mean. The child had to be in an institution. So now we're talking about the overlap between chinuch and kashrus. And the poskim want to know, are we going to tell a young child, and we're going to go through the different ages of a child, the different levels of chinuch, to wait 6 hours before the child could eat milchiks after having eaten fleishiks? And these issues are much more relevant here in Israel, because here in Israel and also in Europe, I believe, it's much more common to eat fleishiks for lunch. So let's say a child goes off to school, you send them a sandwich box, and in the sandwich box, there might be fleishiks. So now the question is, the child comes home from school, he had a fleishik meal, let's say at 1 p.m., and the child is in pajamas already at 6 p.m. Are you going to say to him he can't eat, milchiks and maybe even candies, milchik chocolates? So the poskim are going to get into this, and they're going to separate and differentiate between different age levels of the child. We're going to start with Rav Vosner. That's called the Shut Shevet HaLevi, which is number 31 on the bottom of your page 120. And he says the following. There's something called Ktane Ktanim. These are very young children. And the Ramah in Hilchas Shabbos speaks about these Ktane Ktanim with regard to Amira Li'akum Shvus, when you need a guy to cook food for a child on Shabbos. And the Shulchan Aruch there in Shin Chav Ches speaks about asking a guy to cook for a chole on Shabbos. And the Shulchan Aruch says if it's a chola sheyesh bo sakana, then even a Jew could cook for him. But if it's a chola she'ein bo sakana, then we can combine amira la'akum as a shvus together with chola sheyesh bo she'ein bo sakana. And for the sake of a chola, there's certain very strict conditions. We're going to allow the guy to cook on behalf of the chola. Are you with me so far? I don't know if David's there or Yudi's there. I don't know. The Zoom is a little bit nuts for me, but I've been suffering with this since Corona. In any event, the Ramah writes that, hi David, Ktanim, young children are like a chola. And we're going to allow, again, under certain circumstances, a guy, if the child has nothing to eat, to cook on Shabbos for the child. So we see, that the halacha considers a young child to be a chola with regard to eating. So the Shevet HaLevi, applying this Ramah, says the following: Ein makom lahachmir. There's no room to impose a chumrah on ktanei ktanim, on young infants, b'shehiyah bein basa v'cholav. And he quotes the Ramah that a child has a din, a status of a chola she'ein bo sakana. Now, Rav Ovadia Yosef has a very, very fascinating tshuva here on this topic of kashrus for ktanim and chinuch, which I believe has ramifications way beyond the Shevet HaLevi. So the Shevet HaLevi is very straightforward. We don't have to impose upon a very young child to wait between fleishiks and milchiks because he has the status of a chol. And that was the Ramah in Shin Chav Ches. However, Rav Ovadia throws a different halachic principle into the arena, and that's called sfek sfeka, a double suffix. And he writes, Umiu b'ktanim yesh makom lomar she'efshar lahakel, that we can be makil and not require that the child wait 6 hours before he eats milchiks. He says the following: we have one issue about whether or not we're allowed to feed Easter to a katan. That's called the misfei lebi adayim. Then we have the Ran in Masechta Yoma. Kolshu litzorach hatinok afal pi sheigia lechinuch. We're going on to page 121. Machilin oso isurim derabanan afilu biyadayim. Interesting. The Ran is telling us that even an older child who's higia lechinuch, lamazogin, he's 9 years old. Even if I hold that you're not allowed to feed a katan non-kosher food biyadayim, which is the subject of this week's Parshas Emor, in any event. However, with regard to isurim derabanan, everybody agrees that you're allowed to feed him that which is asur miderabanan. If it's litzarach hakatan, if he has a need for it. So that although the Ran is a very, very in the halachic context of this issue, he's a radical shita of a matir. The Rambam, for example, at the end of Vacholos Asuros writes that lachila biyadayim asur, you're not allowed to feed a katan, even that which is asur midrabanan. So this becomes, for example, very relevant in terms of ice cream. Ice cream very often has cholav akum in it. So let's say cholav akum is also, but it's only also the Rabbanan. Can I feed him this ice cream that has cholav akum in it? Let's say if I want to take the Rambam's position, I'm not allowed to do that. The Ran would say it's okay because cholav akum is not awesome in a Torah, it's only awesome in a Rabbanan. So now, when we want to feed a child milchiks after meat, in the worst case scenario, you can call that an Isa D'Rabbanan, which according to the Ran, even in the case of a cotton shegia lechinuch, you're allowed to feed him an Isa D'Rabbanan. We would not rely on the Ran as one suffix, given the fact that the Rambam disagrees with the Ran, but now we have another issue. And he says the following, that even though the Ran is not accepted l'halacha, but rather we paskin like the Rambam, and that's the Shulchan Aruch. However, we have a machlokes about waiting for milchik, waiting to eat milchiks after fleishiks. The Ramah writes, that's what we saw last week, in Siman Peches, that the minhag in his medinos is to allow eating cheese almost immediately after you eat basar. Okay, he says wait an hour. And even though we don't accept that opinion, we wait 6 hours, but nevertheless, we have a suffix on this issue. Now we can combine two sveikos, says Rabbi Vadim, and make it into a svek sveika. Number one, it's only an Isa D'Rabbanan, and we might be allowed to feed a child with our hands actively an Isa D'Rabbanan if the child needs it. Number two, I'm not even sure if it's asur, because we have the shita that misuda l'suda only requires akiras hashulchan, kinuach hapeh, and so forth and so on, and you can eat milk immediately after you eat meat. And even though here too we paskin l'chumra on that suffix, but nevertheless we still have the opinion that it's permissible. And therefore, in terms of giving a child milchiks after fleishiks, you know what this means in Israel, right? You have a double suffix. You might be allowed to give him something that's osam b'rabbanan, and even if you're not allowed to because of the Rambam shita, but nevertheless, you don't have to wait. Even if you're an adult, you don't have to wait after meat to eat milchiks. And therefore, the Yabia Omer comes to the conclusion that, you know what, let's train the child to wait an hour, and therefore we have a svek sveika. Joe?
Just want to clarify that one of the things you've been talking about, which you must do, is to wash out your mouth.
Correct.
With regards to this young child, would that create a problem?
Not a problem. We're going to have to require that the child rinse his mouth out.
Yeah, but I'm saying the child might not have that concept. You know.
Okay, that's part of chinuch. In other words, we're trying to maintain the minimum obligation of chinuch. The child is a child higia lechinuch. He's mature enough. So we have to tell him that we separate from fleishiks and milchiks, but we don't have to go beyond 1 hour. And therefore, comes the tshuva of the Abiyah over to the following conclusion. Aflik dom yosani gila chinu. So you're talking about a 9-year-old child. He tiru. They were mekil. We don't have to wait for 6 hours. We'll see exactly what we do have to do. And he quotes Reb Nisan Karelitz, the chief rabbi, who agreed to that psak. So based on this logic and this approach, we're going to see numbers 33 and 34, the Chut Hashani and the Yalkut Yosef, which is also Ravad Yosef. And he writes the following. Number 33, you have it? Shir gil achinuch l'archaka bein basar lecholov, as long as the child is old enough to understand that you're not allowed to eat basar v'cholov together. We don't eat meat and milk together. Once the child reaches that state, he understands, let's call it a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, then asur harchaka beineim. And Keva Demikar did mutar lechol gvina miyad achar basar, since according to the Ramah, strictly speaking, you're allowed to eat milk after meat as long as you rinse your mouth out and you wash your hands. And yesh omer tzarich lahamtin shachas, okay, will require 1 hour of waiting. Therefore, efshar lechayev es hakoton shegiya lechinuch ad 9 shanim lahamtin 6 shos milechol gvina achar basar. We will not impose upon a katan an Isser, prohibition, that would enjoin him from eating gvina after basar. Therefore, the chiyuv of chinuch at this point, once he's 3 years old, 4 years old, 5 years old, up to 9, is to teach him to wait 1 hour, require him a 1 hour wait, and then allow him to eat milchiks. Okay, that's up to the age of 9. So in between, let's say 3 or 4 and 9. Gam mamtakim chalaviyim. You see, here we get into the following issue. We're only giving him the milk because he has a tzorah. There are chocolates that are milchik, and there's no real tzorah for him to eat the chocolates. He says, no. That's also called litzorah. The child wants to eat chocolate. Give him the chocolate. He waited an hour, give him the chocolate. But now the child is 9 years old. He says, just like with regard to the Mishnah in Yoma, that says that when a child reaches the age of 9, he starts fasting on Yom Kippur. We train him what's called Taina Shos. You know, he shouldn't eat breakfast that morning of Yom Kippur, wait till lunch, blah, 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 whatever it is. So too, with regard to eating milchiks after fleishiks, we should be training him l'suda. Now, what is l'suda with regard to the mitzvah of chinuch? B'archaka zu shebein suda l'suda shel katan hu im ragil lahamtil shalosh or arba shos bein suda l'suda shelo. A child eats more frequently than an adult. So it's a 9-year-old who, let's say, usually will wait 3 hours until he gets hungry again. Let him wait what would be l'suda for the child, 3 hours or 4 hours. If, however, the child eats every 5 hours, then he should be waiting 5 hours. When he gets close to bar mitzvah age, lo mazogan, he's 11 or 12, at that point, he should be waiting a full 6 hours. And in Yalkut Yosef, also authored by the Abiyah Omer of Avad Yosef, he writes, and we'll skip down in number 34 to line 5, Havel ein lahakil liten litinokos shegiel lechinuch mamtakim v'shokolat sheish b'hem tarov v'schol. He says that with regard to chocolates and the like, mamtakim, we wait the full 6 hours for the child, if he's a giel lechinuch. So therefore, the sveka that we mentioned before of the Abiyah Omer, in which Rav Ovadia was willing to be mekil to feed a child without having to wait 6 hours, and therefore it's a little bit much to ask a child to wait 6 hours, then after waiting for 1 hour, we can allow him to eat milchiks. And we have the sveka because we're feeding him an Issa d'Rabbanan, which is okay according to the Ran, and we're waiting an hour, which is okay according to the Ramah. However, that's because there's a tzorech. The child has to eat milchiks, but the child doesn't have to eat milchik chocolates, and therefore nachon lahachmir b'zeh. And then he writes, nachon lechaniches ektanim shana achas lifnei gil bar mitzvah. Why? Because in the Nedarim we have halacha of mufla samach lish at the age of 12 for a boy, 11 for a girl. That's a year before bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah. We should be imposing upon them a chinuch that they should be careful not to eat milk after meat for 6 hours. So we have 3 gradations. We've got ktani ktanim. They don't have any chinuch at all, and there are no holds barred. We saw already that a cotton of that age is chola, and we could ask a guy to cook for him on Shabbos, and we could feed them milchiks after fleishiks. Then we get to the next level of chinuch, because they understand the difference between what? Between milk and meat, that you can't milk and meat together. And here we're going to train them to wait between meat and milk, but we can be making with regard to telling them to wait an hour. Once they reach the age of 9, which is the full-fledged, full-blast chinuch level, we should begin to train them gradually. Let's say they normally wait 3 hours or 4 hours between one meal and the other. That's what they should be waiting until we finally get to the katan who's 1 year before bar mitzvah. And at this point, we should be training them to wait a full 6 hours. Okay. Now we have one more point before we want to give a general summary of everything that we've learned. And there's a sefer here by Rav Yoshev Kanoal. I'm not familiar with the sefer. It's called V'Achalta V'Savot on page 122. And he gives an overview of the last piece that we learned regarding a katan. And he says the following. Nitan lahakil lekatan, lahamtin zman katzar yoser, a very small amount of time, a short amount of time, let's say an hour, between meat and milk. He says, Ad gil shalosh, up until the age of 3, there's no chinuch at all, and no need to separate between meat and milk. Now the child is already about 4 years old, up to 9, he says 10, and he says then we should absolutely require that he wait 1 hour. But he says we should be machmir with regard to candies, meaning milchik chocolates. Once he reaches the age of 11 or 12, then we should begin to train him and be mechanic him to wait the full 6 hours. Now, the last piece is very fascinating because, again, like we saw earlier in the Pri Megadim, the rules that we're familiar with in halacha, we deviate from them in this context. For example, let's say I don't remember whether I waited a full 6 hours. Can I eat milchiks? Normally, we would apply the universal principle of safek d'Rabbanan l'kula. However, the Yad Yehuda, whose last name is Landau, writes that Mishi Yeshlo Safek im Avru Sheshos Sarch Lahamtin Achu Vadai. He should not eat milchiks until he's absolutely sure that 6 hours have passed. The Ein Matir Mishum Safek d'Rabbanan l'kula. Why not? Comes along the Yad Yehud and he says it's a davar sheyesh lo matir. What's a davar sheyesh lo matir? We just wait a certain amount of time, like for example a basis shenol of yontiv, and you wait until after yontiv. That's a davar sheyesh lo matirin. Afilu be'elef lo bot. Now let's keep in mind that the principle of davar sheyesh lo matirin is relevant to taroves, to mixtures of heter and iser. The Yad Yehud is applying it to the question of waiting between meat and milk. He's arguing that if you don't wait between meat and milk, you're basically combining meat and milk in the same meal. And it's governed by the laws of Tarovis. And we cannot be mekil in a tarovis, even on a drabanan, in a case of a davar sheish lo matir, which means we wait, and then for sure it's mutter. However, we quoted earlier a sefer called Hakashrus, and he says, "Hasomech lahakil kishe'iev shalavar lo hifsa." Even though the Yad Yehuda says you have to be sure that 6 hours passed, and if you're in doubt, you have to wait until you're sure, you're certain. No, we will not impose that chumrah of the Yad Yehuda, extending the davar she'eino yesh lo matir into this scenario, and therefore you could be mekil and apply the principle of safek d'rabbanan l'kul. Again, you have to be honest with yourself that there's, reason to believe that it's 1 hour. I'm sorry, it's reason to believe that 6 hours have passed. Now on pages 123, and after that he has just an empty blank page, he has an overview of everything that we've covered until now. So let's see if we can go over this. Number 1, Minat Torah basar b'cholav is only aser after bishul. And MiRabanan, we're going to extend it even if there was no bishul. Minat Torah, it's only basar behema. But MiRabanan would extend it to include even basar oaf. Number 2, to eat milchiks after fleishiks, we need to wait misuda l'suda. How much is misuda l'suda? We have one opinion that it's 6 hours, headed up by the Rif and the Rambam. We have another opinion of Tosfos. It's immediately when you complete one suda with Akiras HaShulchan and Birkas HaMazon, and you're allowed to start a new suda immediately afterwards. And then we have the middle compromise shita of the V'hagir Rabbeinu Tam, that you wait a certain period of time. Oh, I'm sorry. We didn't get to that shita yet, but according to Rabbeinu Tam and the Bahag, you can terminate your suda even without Birkas HaMazon, and all you need is the Netilas Yadayim and Kinuach HaPeh. And the Ramah is the one who comes up with this compromise shita. He's not willing to go as far as the Bahagir Rabbeinu Tam, not even as far as the Rav Yon Tosfos, but 1 hour is enough. And as we said last week, some will require 3 hours. The Shach and the Taz, as we discussed at great length last week, anyone who has a Reach Torah is got to be machmer for 6 hours. However, the Chassam Sofer, if you recall, was mekil in the case of a chola that we could wait 1 hour, and we saw repercussions of that in an analogy to a katan who has the status of a chola, and therefore 1 hour would be sufficient until he gets to the older ages of chinam. The Abiyah Omer was mekil even in a choli ktsas. And Rabbi Omer had the following scenario. Let's just review it quickly. A person made a bracha, and he didn't realize that he was about to eat milchiks after fleishiks. And if we tell him you're not allowed to eat milchiks, his bracha is a bracha l'vatola. And here Rav Avad Yosef was mekil, let him taste a little bit of the milk, so that the bracha is not a bracha l'vatola, because that's a doraisa, and then he'll wait the rest of the hours to eat his milk kamil. He says the Ashkenazic minhag in the Germans is to wait 3 hours, not 1 hour. And we have one opinion that says all you have to do is wait 5 hours and a little bit more than 5 hours. In my family, we have the minhag of waiting 5 hours and 20 minutes into the 6th hour. Some say 5.5 hours. And Rav Avad Yosef says, B'shas chak, you can rely on that shita that 5.5 hours is enough, and especially if you only ate chicken. And then we have Rab Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who said that even if you have the minhag of waiting 3 hours, you should change your minhag and wait 6 hours. He's not a fan of the minhag of 6 hours. Now, if he tasted something between basar and challah, but he didn't swallow it, so if he chewed it, then he has to wait 6 hours because of the Rambam Shita basar b'shinayim. If he swallowed something that has fleishiks without chewing it, then we have to be machmir for the other Rishonim because it's maletam basar, and he has to wait 6 hours. The Tur and the Pri Megadim say we have to be machmir for both shitos, which means that either in a case where he chewed it without swallowing it, being machmir for the Rambam, requiring 6 hours, or in a case where he swallowed it without chewing it, we have to be machmir for the Rishonim of motzi tam, he's got to wait 6 hours. However, if he spits it out without chewing it, and he never swallowed it, or in the case of a tavshil shel basar, then mimanav shach, he doesn't have to wait 6 hours. Comes along the Pri Megadim, and he says that in a case where he swallowed something that has fleishiks in it, even though he didn't chew it, lo plu. Okay, and then we had the discussion about katanim, which we joined. And now we move on to page 126, and that's eating cheese and then eating meat after cheese. Amar Rav Chizda, the same Gemara in Chulin that we started with. Achal basar asur lechol gvina. Okay, that we know. And we discussed this at great length. You don't eat milchiks after fleishiks. But mutal lechol basar, if he ate gvina, he's allowed to eat meat after the gvina. However, if he wants to eat meat after gvina, he's got to make sure that he doesn't have any cheese in his mouth or in his hands. So we're going to require adochas hapeh, rinsing out your mouth after cheese, and netilas yadayim, and washing your hands. However, the plot grows thicker. And we're going to see that it's not so simple to allow eating fleishiks after cheese. We start with the Gemara in Chulin, but this time on Daf Kuf Daled, that's number 2. Tana Igra Chamua de Rabbi Amma. Of ugvina necholim ba'afik kiryon. Rashi says there hefker she'ein nizar bahen. He doesn't have to be careful about eating cheese after poultry. Who tani love or who amar love? And now the question is, when he's eating chicken after milk, after cheese, whether or not he needs the tilas yadayim and kinuach hapeh. And the Gemara has different parts. We're not going to go through the sugi. We don't have too much time. But Beit Shammai say that he has to wash his hands and wash out his mouth. Beit Hillel omer meidiach, hu adilim kaneach, etc., etc. So la'alacha, at this point, we're going to allow you to eat milchiks and then fleishiks, but you have to wash out your mouth and you have to clean your hands. So Shulchan Aruch says, "Ochal gvina mutar lechol achar basar miyad, ubilvad she'ayin yadav." Okay, either he washes his hands or he looks at his hands. to make sure that he doesn't have any pieces of milchiks, of cheese, stuck to his hands. And therefore, for example, at night, when he can't really check his hands well, then he's got to wash his hands. In addition, so he's got to make sure that he doesn't have cheese stuck in his mouth. How does he guarantee that? So the Mechaber advocates that he chews a piece of bread after eating the cheese. And then he rinses out his mouth. And then at the end of this paragraph, if he's going to eat chicken after cheese, here's the first time that we've encountered a kula because it's basar of, which is not d'oraisa, as opposed to basar behem. Now, I just want to fast forward for a minute from number 3, which we did, to number 6 for a moment, which is on the bottom of your page, 127. The Ramah writes, Yesh machmirim afilu bebasar achar gvina. There are those who took upon themselves a chumrah not to eat meat after cheese. And that minhag reverberates la'aloch la'maisa in the case of gvina kosher. Hard cheese. What's hard cheese? Ein ochlim achreha afilu besar of. We don't even eat chicken after hard cheese. And it's exactly the same as eating milchiks after fleishiks. Wait the full 6 hours. V'yesh makilu. But at the end he says, Mikol makom tov lahachmir. We should be machmir. And what does that mean? We should be machmir. The Taz on the next page says we should be machmir to require 6 hours after gvina kosher. What is gvina kosher? So again, on the next page on the bottom, which would be 128, number 7, he quotes the Ben Ish Chai that gvina kosher sha'ovar oleh shisha chadoshim. Now, please correct me if I'm wrong here, but there are very rare cheeses, I think they come from Switzerland, where they process the cheese for 6 months. Those are the cheeses that you may see with holes in them. I forget, is there a word for that? Hard cheese, I guess you call it. But
yeah, I heard a little while ago that Reb Shmuel Paskin, there's no hard cheese with manazeh anymore. So it's all just theoretical.
We don't have it anymore.
No, it was Parmesan, but he said there's some process change in the last 100 years or something like that. It's a technical thing that he says there's no such thing anymore.
Interesting. Who said it again?
From Shmuel Kamenetsky.
From Shmuel. From
that's what I heard. I didn't hear from him directly, but you know.
Then the Ben Ish Chai writes, Im lo avru oleh shisha chadoshim. If you have hard cheese, but it wasn't processed for 6 months, mamtin shah achas. Shah achas. So that if it was processed for a month, then you wait an hour. If it was processed for 2 months, you wait 2 hours. Every month that it was processed adds another hour. Very strange.
Yep.
All right, just to finish up for today, let's retrace our steps back to page 127, which we skipped, number 4. The Beis Yosef writes, Yesh machmir al atzmon, shelo lechol basar achar gvina besuda achas. What brought about this chumrah? The Gemara says that you're allowed to eat meat after milk, after cheese? And the answer is, it's based on Zohar. The Zohar says in Parshas Mishpatim, right, we're a couple of days now before Lag BaOmer, you're all invited to have barbecue. Anyway, so the Zohar says, Ashkan dechoman di ochel hai michlo kechado, o b'shat achado, b'suda chadto, arba yomin it chazia gedia. All right, I'm going to read the Hebrew translation here. It's a little bit small for me. Matzanu shekol mi she'ochel dover zeh, he eats meat after milk. O b'shar achas, within 1 hour, or b'suda achas, within 1 suda. B'meshech arboim yom, nireh b'klipas ha'adam tzuras gidi mekulos. V'seya shel tuma miskarvim elo. V'gorem she's ored didim ba'olam. Dinam she'enam kiddoshim. Im yolid ben b'yomim elam elavim lo, lomer machnisim b'ben ze neshama misitra diachra. Okay, so this is a lot of stuff about sitra diachra, and basically saying that eating milk or cheese, for example, after meat in the same suda or immediately afterwards is not a good thing. It creates a certain kind of metaphysical, Kabbalistic, Sitra Achra impact on the soul, which is passed on even to his child. Ukvar Kosav Mordechai, Sherameir Mirottenberg, that was the Rebbe of the Rosh and the Mordechai, Hayanoeg Shelo Lechol Basar, Behema V'chaya Acher Gvin, not to eat meat after cheese. Lefisha Pam Achas, Misauda Lesuda Motzo Gvina Ben Shinov. One time, he had fleishiks immediately after cheese, and he discovered that he had cheese caught between his teeth. And Gozal Lahachmir al Atzmo, he accepted upon himself an Isur not to eat meat after cheese. V'yein ze kecholik ala Talmud. How could you go l'chumra when the Talmud was mekil? And he says because of a Maisa Shahoy, because it happened to him. V'ho vadai shehu zechon levracha lo ra sefer Zohar. Even though the Maram MiRabanan did not see the Zohar, afilu hachi oya machmer al atzmo mishum Maisa Shahoy. The afal pishoy mekil ba'of. Hainu lefisha lo ra Zohar. Aval anu shezachinu l'ros tov v'nochon lahachmir afilu bebasar of. So again, based on this entire presentation of the Zohar on the one hand and the Mordechai on the other, even though halacha l'maisa, we pass like the Shulchan Aruch that you're allowed to eat meat after gvina, but that's only mikra din. But on the other hand, tov lahachmir, but we're going to add the qualification that tov lahachmir in certain kinds of cheeses that were processed for a long time.
So when the,
Did
so
you
when the
say
Beis
something?
Yosef, so when the Beis Yosef says over here not to eat meat after cheese, he's talking the hard cheese number one.
I don't know.
Just says, and is he talking? He says ben suda lasuda, even after 6 hours. He's saying
No. He's not saying that. He's just impressing on us that we shouldn't be eating fleishiks and milchiks in the same suda. So therefore, even though he started with milchiks, if he eats fleishiks in the same suda, that's something that should be avoided. Even though mikra din, it's mutter. And let's just, I think we're already finished with that time, but let's just add 2 minutes and see number 5 in the Abia Omer. Harotze lechel basar achar shachal gvina. Should he be waiting? And he says, Maskana de Dina, Shemikra din mutal lechel basar achar gvina. According to the strict letter of the law, you're allowed to eat meat after cheese, but you have to wash out your mouth and make sure that your hands are clean. If somebody wants to wait an hour or more after gvina before he eats meat, the yodashu noy came derech chumra, and he realizes that that's not required. He's not violating al titosh mitoras imecha, but he's doing it as a separate chumrah. The yeshlo tzarch levatel minhago, he could do atara, and he could be mater his minhag. And the atara should include the fact that he never said b'li neder. Diaz yeh mutalo. If he mistakenly thought that he has to wait an hour after gvina in order to eat meat, he doesn't need atira. But again, it seems like there is room for this chumrah and this chasidus based on the Maram, Rutenberg, and the Zohar. So therefore, if you have that minhag and you took it upon yourself as a chumrah, understanding full well that you're going beyond the letter of the law, then you're going to need a hatorah. And that hatorah is based on the fact that you accepted a minhag without saying b'li neder, and we'll grant you a hatorah.
I have a question. Yeah, so what about the people who the people in Shavuos, they can milk kiddush followed by a shleisha kesuda, right? Did they what do they do with all this? Do they say we were not going to this, or maybe they don't eat cheese?
It seems from the Ramah, at least, that we should discourage that, because the Ramah writes tov lahachmir. So to eat cheese and meat in the same meal, and the minhag that I'm familiar with, I don't know if you have this minhag, is that after he eats the balinces or whatever he eats on Shavuos, he should make a bracha achrona and walk around the street a little bit and then have a fleishik meal.
Right.
But would you not say that because I was thinking that because you have the mitzvah, you have this inyan that's throwing off the other reach ra or whatever it is that's making it that you shouldn't eat it. In other words, because it's l'shem mitzvah or something like that, then it's taking it over.
I don't know. I'm not familiar with that, Joe. If
Wondering if that was that.
Yeah,
I don't. That's I'm not, why you.
I've never been exposed to that. There's a lot of Kabbalistic svaras over here that unless you're a baki in the Zohar, I don't know. But I would be afraid to be making. I think the accepted minhag, as far as I know, is to terminate that meal and wait a while, and after an interruption, start a new meal.
All right.
Eating a fleishik meal.
Right.
Okay, then. So I think we'll stop here.
Okay.
Next week is the day after Lag BaOmer, correct? Lag BaOmer is on Tuesday. If I got that right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So then, okay, I'll be weighing a little bit less next time you see me, I hope.
Do you need more photocopies for next week? Or sorry, pictures?
Well, let's just see where we're up to. We're up to page
27?
120. Just 1 second. We did the Ramah. So we're up to page 128, I believe.
Right. So I sent out till page 136 already.
Yeah, great. So I think
for next week, right?
I think we're okay for next week.
Okay, good.
So we'll finish
Thank you,
this.
Ralph.
Next week in Mitzvah, we'll make a siyum on this issue of waiting between milchus and meat, and then we'll see where we go from there. Okay, then.
Thank you, Ralph.
Thank you so much.
Okay, have a good day, everybody.
Yeah, you too. Call too. Bye bye.